got some catching up to do. What is going on, all you wonderful A-plussers out there? It is I, Stuart, here once again with another Star Trek review. No, I take that back. With 3 Star Trek reviews. I have, not only did I miss last week's episode, but we also got an episode early. And as I'm sure a lot of you know, the first episode I'm going to be talking about is actually the episode I was super hyped. I was really hyped up about this year. When I heard they were going to be doing a Lower Decks crossover with Strange New Worlds, I mean, my first question was, how? And then when we had a little bit of it in the teaser, I thought, okay, I kind of see what they're going with. So it's probably going to be one of two things. Like, I think Boimler and Mariner are going to be sent back to the days of, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, but very likely it'll probably be like a B plot, because we didn't see too much footage of it, and I honestly kind of went into this episode expecting to be slightly disappointed. I didn't think it was going to be a huge crossover. I thought the crossover elements were going to be a bit downplayed, if that makes sense. And that's mostly because in general, when it comes to Star Trek and other crossovers they've done in the past, they've never really been mind-blowing or anything, if I'm being honest. I mean, it's been cool, don't get me wrong. I always love seeing, the episode, for example, with Scotty in The Next Generation. I thought that was a fine episode. But, I didn't think it was like amazing or anything. I thought it was really cool to see, Geordi and Scotty, the chemistry between the two of them not getting along at first, but then working together at the end. I liked it, It just didn't blow me away. Even Star Trek Generations, a fun movie. I enjoy it, but I mean, look at how very little the original series cast was utilized. I mean, we didn't even get the full cast in that movie to show how very little they were used. So I didn't really expect that much going into this, and boy, were my expectations blown away from the beginning. Okay, so I had no idea we would actually even get any scenes that take place, during the Lower Decks era. I thought they were going to be getting sent back in time off screen. So when we start off the episode and it's in animation form and we get the full Lower Decks crew, awesome. And by Lower Decks crew, I mean like the 4 main characters, not like the full crew of the not like the full crew of the Cerritos, but just the 4 main characters. So basically the plot is that there is a portal that they have to go investigate, and this portal was originally discovered by Captain Pike or the Orions, according to I always forget her name. I am really bad with Tendi. That's right. With Tendi, she claims that Orions found this portal first before Starfleet. So there's a little bit of a debate between her and Boimler about that. But they head down to the portal, and just right from the beginning, the gags about this are just hilarious. So the portal turns on, and there's 2 jokes in one. You have a moment where the portal turns on, Boimler's sucked to the past, and as he's like about to get sucked, he says the funniest line ever: "The portal is portaling me." And then right before he gets sucked away, he says, "Remember me," very similar to Crusher's line from Next Generation. I can't remember which episode in particular, but I do remember someone pointing that out. And so the fact that you get a reference and a really hilariously dumb line in the same moment, I thought was just great. So we get him in the past, and in the most Boimler fashion ever, he's trying really hard not to screw things up. And of course that causes him to screw things up in the past. Basically, he's trying so hard not to make any changes, but in doing so, he's making more changes. For one example, some Orions show up, and of course, because they're Orions back in the days of the TOS era, it's just assumed that they're pirates. So Captain Pike is kind of ready to get into battle stations and basically ready to battle with the Orions, but Boimler has to convince him not to without screwing up the future. But he doesn't know how much he should interfere with this, because if he says too much, it could change the future. But if he doesn't say enough, they could end up getting into a firefight with the Orions, which could then prevent Tendi's birth in the future. So things like that. And then even doing that, though, causes the portal to get stolen. So now Boimler has to track the Orions without the crew looking, leading to another hilarious visual gag of the crew just turning their backs while he rigs the Enterprise in order to track down the Orions. And then when they do, they're forced to give up some important grain that was supposed to be used for a starving colony just to get the portal back. So you have Boimler just feeling really guilty about just being there and causing all this stuff. And then on top of that, you have his interactions with Spock, where this is a younger Spock, so he's not the Spock that Boimler, read about in the future. And in a lot of ways, it's almost like watching a fan interact with this version of Spock, because, again, if you take like kind of a casual fan of Star Trek, they have this very specific idea of what Spock is like, emotionless and, basically very Vulcan, if that makes obviously that's probably the most generic way I could have described Spock without really even describing him. But the reason I say this though is because, like, in this episode, here's my one kind of nitpick actually, is that Spock does kind of try to experiment with using his human side emotions, and this is mostly because of his relationship with Nurse Chapel. So we get moments where Spock laughs, he smiles, and I love the way that this is filmed because it all comes off like a horror movie. And so every time Boimler sees this, he's worried, oh crap, did I break Spock? Did I break the future? Now my nitpick about this, and it's a small nitpick, but it's the fact that we saw that the two of them had been dating in the previous episode, and they started at the very end of episode 5. But during that, there was never a moment that you see Spock trying to use human emotions. It would have been cool to have at least one scene where, like, maybe Nurse Chapel says a really bad joke and Spock does a fake laugh, like, ha ha ha, that's humorous, or something like that. But because of this, I think, like, I was as surprised as Boimler because I hadn't seen, Spock do this before. This is something that he's only trying recently with Nurse Chapel, even though he had dated her for a couple episodes now, and we as an audience haven't seen it yet. So it's a nitpick. This did not ruin the episode for me at all. It just added to, in fact, if anything, it added to the gag. I just wish it was established just, a little bit in the previous episode. But that's okay. That is totally okay. There's also this hilarious misunderstanding with Una because Boimler's acting very strange around her, and things don't get better later on in the episode, until the very end of the episode, so I'll get to that later. But basically, he's acting very weird around her, and she has no idea why, and she's worried it might be because of something about her in the future. He might know something. And Pike just tries to brush it off by saying he's just, and we don't see what he was about to say, but I think we can all assume that he was just going to say that he's weird. But before I go any further, I've totally realized that I forgot to mention the intro. The intro is animated and very similar to the style of Lower Decks. In fact, you even have like the little squid monster and the koala bear at the very end of it. Double points for that. That was just absolutely hilarious. But anyway, so they get the portal back and they're about to send Boimler back to the future, but in the most Lower Decks fashion ever, before he goes back into the future, Mariner goes through the portal to rescue Boimler. And God, sorry, just thinking about it just makes me laugh. And so then they're both stuck in the past and they can't figure out a way to get back to the future. But this leads to more great gags because this leads to Boimler and Nurse Chapel. Basically, Boimler saying he might have screwed up Spock, and Nurse Chapel assuring him that everything's fine. But because of this moment, because Boimler mentions that Spock having emotions has never been referenced in history, Nurse Chapel kind of just realizes that her effect on Spock is very, very minor compared to everything that he's going to experience in his life. She is not an important part of his life. And it's funny. It's funny and sad at the same time. Like, as the audience, we're laughing, but I also couldn't help but feel sorry for her because that's not something that anyone wants to learn. You don't want to learn that, oh yeah, your impact with your current partner is like going to be so minor compared to everything else. It's like, that's not something you want to hear. I also love Lan like trying to tell Boimler not to make any attachments because of her own personal experience. I also really like that Mariner is a really big fan of Uhura. I don't know if that was ever established in Lower Decks, but you know what? It's something that makes total sense to me. So I really do like her and Uhura having a moment together, and Uhura being not really taking it badly, but not taking it well, being confused more than anything, because again, you know, she's very, very young in this compared to the Uhura that we know in the original series. So when she finds out that she's destined for greatness, you know, this is just a huge weight on her shoulder. Very, very irresponsible for Mariner to, you know, bring this up to her, of course, but I mean, it's Mariner. She's probably one of the most irresponsible people in Starfleet. So it totally makes sense for her character, honestly. I do like how she gets Uhura to learn how to kind of loosen up and have a little bit of fun here and there. Something that we kind of saw with her character in the previous episode. I like that they're kind of still continuing that with this episode. God, what else, man? I'm sorry, but there's just so much to talk about in this episode. There's also this whole thing where Boimler accidentally spoils the fact that it's Chris Pike's birthday coming up. And Chris Pike does not want to celebrate his birthday. And at first, you know, Boimler tries to convince Pike to do it because he tries to say, without spoiling the fact that he's going to die soon, he tries to say, you don't necessarily know how many birthdays you might have left, not realizing that, of course, Pike knows when he's going to die. He knows the exact moment it's going to happen. But Pike just kind of assures Boimler that that's not the reason, and that it kind of goes back to his dad and the fact that he's about to hit the age where he's about to pass his dad's age when his dad passed away. And so between the two of them, Boimler eventually does kind of convince Pike that, you know, any one of the crew would give, basically like how Pike mentions that he would give up any one of his birthdays just to spend one more with his dad. Boimler says that you could say the same thing about the crew, and this kind of gets Pike to come around the whole birthday thing. So, man, I really hope I'm not missing anything. I think I got everything that I wanted to talk about from that. But basically, they do eventually get the portal working again because they discover, I believe it was dilithium was the element that they were looking for underneath the ship, and this is because it was built with a piece of the original Enterprise from the show Star Trek Enterprise, from Archer's Enterprise. And one thing I really love about this moment is that before, in this episode, we have basically Boimler and Uhura just geeking out about everything going on in this show, or everything going on the Enterprise, and the crew kind of being like very weirded out by it. But then the crew kind of realizes when they're talking about Captain Archer that they're doing the exact same thing that Boimler and Mariner were doing too. Love that at the very end. Oh, another gag I just wanted to kind of give an honorable mention to. I do love how they keep making, you know, tons and tons of Star Trek references, just like they do in Lower Decks. And I love Spock's response to this, which is the fact that their references are very strangely specific. I thought that was hilarious too. I am kind of like, there are things that they mention where I'm just kind of like, how would they know about that? In Lower Decks, I can always put it aside as saying that some of this banner in my head. I never really see all of Lower Decks as 100% canon. I see it as like mostly like loose canon. Like I see Lower Decks as everything we see does happen, but I look at a lot of the banter and I'm like, it would make zero sense for anyone to know this specific thing about Star Trek if you're living in that world. So I look at moments like that and I don't really consider them canon. So it is kind of funny when you have moments like that in live action and I'm like, well, I guess I can't dismiss it anymore. I guess that is kind of canon now. And I think that moment in particular where they mention, I believe it was a reference to Deep Space Nine when they go back to San Francisco in 2022, and Spock kind of mentions that being a very specific reference that they don't understand. Man, I'm laughing so much in this review just thinking about this episode. Is it obvious that I really like this episode? Yeah. And so to top it all off, the cherry on top. So the episode ends with the Enterprise basically making peace with the Orions. Something I really love is Boimler kind of convincing the Orions to, basically give them back the grain by telling them that, if they let them use the portal, they get to go back to a future where it's considered offensive to assume that all Orions are pirates. And of course they name drop they name dropped Tendi by her actual Orion name, which I totally forgot what it was, so I apologize, but they recognize the name, and this is why they are totally okay with the two of them using the portal to go back into the future. So the two of them go back to the future. We get one last really funny Easter egg where Commander Jack Ransom, and this one flew over my head originally because I actually didn't know this, but the actor who plays Commander Jack Ransom is actually married to Una, or the actress that plays Una in real life, something I had no idea about. So we see a scene where basically Boimler is looking at this poster that was reference of Una. This is what I was mentioning before, how things don't get better with him, and this is the reason is because Uhura does kind of mention to Una that that Boimler has a poster of her in his locker, and she's getting like a completely different idea than what it actually is. She's thinking like a pinup poster, and what it actually is a recruitment poster that she happens to be the front of, and it even has her a saying from her the Illyrians, and I can't remember what that saying was, so I apologize, but basically kind of finding out that, you know, she had to fight to keep her place in Starfleet back in episode 3, and now she is the poster woman for Starfleet in the future. Probably one of the most amazing things I think you could hear as a commanding officer in Starfleet, I think. So when she finds out about that, you know, you can just tell that is just something that makes her extremely happy. So it was really funny to have that joke kind of pay off with Jack of all people, of course, seeing the poster and saying, the hottest commanding officer in Starfleet. I laughed so hard for two reasons. One, I agree. Two, finding out later that the two actors are actually married in real life, thought that was absolutely hilarious. I also was kind of like thinking, wow, it's a real good thing that Commander Jack was the one sent back in time. But yeah, so that, and then the cherry on top of the episode, of course, has to be that we cut back to the Enterprise. They're celebrating Captain Pike's birthday, and it's animated. And one of the jokes is how the characters feel weird, as if they're seeing themselves the way that we as the audience are seeing them because of the specific, I believe it was a Romulan ale that they were drinking. Don't remember what kind of ale it was, but it was a type of ale that just kind of made them hallucinate. And you even have Dr. M'Benga kind of like looking at his arm, waving it around and being like, "What's in this drink?" The way he flips out about it at the end was just hilarious. That was the perfect cherry on top of this episode. 10 out of 10, A+. My favorite episode of Star Trek we've gotten ever since ever since Star Trek came back, with the Discovery. This has been the best episode, of Star Trek the last few years. I freaking love it. A+. Wow, I'm blown away, basically. So next episode we're going to be talking about is Under the Cloak of War, a much more serious, totally completely different episode. Now, of course, this is after the aftermath of the Klingon War, and we have a Klingon ambassador who has who is boarding the Enterprise because he has to be transported to a peace summit where he's hoping he can kind of, create peace between the Federation and the Klingon, which, of course, if you know anything about the original series, you know that this doesn't go well. You know that this is not going to end well. And there's a lot of tension with having a Klingon on board. It's funny to me because, again, like I said, I never watched every episode of the original series. A lot of my Star Trek is really from the Next Generation. That was the Star Trek that I grew up on. So it's so funny whenever I kind of go back to, when I'm watching Star Trek in this era, and I'm seeing like so much tension with there being a Klingon on board, because this is like such a normal thing in the Next Generation, but like here it's just having one Klingon on board puts the entire crew like in a very tense kind of mode. Even the crew members that didn't even fight in the war aren't really comfortable having a Klingon on board the ship. You have specifically Nurse Chapel and M'Benga just really feeling uncomfortable because of some PTSD, some trauma that they had to deal with during the war. Now, something with M'Benga that we get is a lot of flashbacks. Well, actually, it's with him and Nurse Chapel. We get a lot of flashbacks of them during the war, and we see that they are not getting they are not happy to have this Klingon ambassador on board at all. And we're thinking that this whole time, I'm thinking that M'Benga is just very prejudiced because he saw some stuff during the war and it's given him this like hatred of all Klingons. That's what I'm thinking the entire time watching this episode. But the flashbacks keep going, and we find out that M'Benga has been assigned this mission that basically requires the adrenaline drug that we see him use in I believe it was the first episode of the season, if I'm not mistaken. So we see it's a mission that requires that drug and that requires him, even though he would prefer to stay behind the lines to help fix up soldiers rather than, going out in the front lines to kill. And we find out that M'Benga knows that this ambassador is completely full of crap. Now, this whole time, I thought I was totally blown away by this because I was actually under the impression that this ambassador had done some stuff that he regretted, that he was part of the Klingon and that he just, renounced himself as a Klingon or the Klingon people. He had me fooled. He had me convinced that he was a guy who had done wrong, but was finally at peace with himself, despite the fact that he abandoned and did something very dishonorable by killing his brothers and abandoning his people. Kind of dishonorable, but given the circumstances, it was understandable. And I was again completely fooled. It's not until we get a moment between him and M'Benga at the very end of the episode where it all gets kind of revealed. The truth was he was never at peace with himself because he never felt any guilt to begin with. He betrayed his brothers because it was convenient for him. His brothers were already dead. M'Benga was the one to kill them. And on top of that, he didn't care that his people were attacking civilians. He ordered his people to attack civilians, and then he fled when his brothers were killed, and then he took credit for it. And it makes sense, because the kind of Klingon that would stab their own brother in the back isn't an honorable Klingon. And it's the type of Klingon that would totally lie as well. And a type of Klingon that would have no guilt about lying as well. So when you kind of get that reveal at the very end of the episode, my mind was just blown. And at the same time, I totally just realized how much it all kind of made sense. This guy was the best bullshitter that we've gotten on this show. And like I said, he fooled me as someone watching it. This whole time, I thought M'Benga was just being prejudiced. No, that is not the case at all. So it leads to basically the Klingon ambassador still trying to make peace with M'Benga. And this was a major mistake on his part. I don't know why he thought he could get through to him. But of course, M'Benga reveals that he knows the truth. And this is where we get kind of an interesting ending, because we see a weird shadowy angle that kind of implies that he didn't attack M'Benga and M'Benga killed him in self-defense. But we also know that this is altered footage, so we don't know what fully went on, but we can probably piece it together that in fact he just killed him as revenge pretty much. And it almost gets pretty confirmed when he has that talk with Pike at the very end of the episode too. One thing he brings up was the fact that he saw what this guy did. The fact that this guy was attacking civilians and he was enjoying it. And he said that if he had killed him right then and there, it wouldn't have been considered revenge. It would have been considered an act of war. And the fact that he's doing it here and now, and it's considered revenge, even though the fact that this guy was about to, escape all his war crimes unpunished, I have to admit, I was taking M'Benga's side, This guy was probably never going to see, a cell. Even if it came out about the stuff that he did. The thing was, he was making such a big difference with the Federation and the Klingon War that I don't think the Federation would have, put him behind bars or anything like that. This guy would have never faced the justice that he needed to face. So I'm kind of on his side at the end of the day. I'm glad he was killed with the same dagger that he used to kill innocent civilians. Very un-Star Trek of me to say, but yeah. This was, again, a great episode. Very different from the one that we had just gotten previous. We went from the funniest episode I think we've gotten of Star Trek in a long time to one of the more darker episodes. And they're both really good in their own ways. While I wouldn't give this episode an A+, I would give this one a solid A. Very, very, very awesome episode for sure. Episode number 9, the musical episode. What's this episode called? Subspace Rhapsody. God, I watched this. This is the episode that is the most fresh on my mind, and yet it's the hardest one for me to talk about, because there was just so much bullshit technobabble to force this excuse for a musical episode. To where I just didn't understand what was going on at some point. So I'm just going to review it for kind of a little bit of face value and just say that the big thing about this episode that worked was that it was a good excuse for us to really see where the characters are at, what they're thinking. I think if I had to compare it to anything, there was an episode of Smallville where Chloe gets this metahuman power where no one's able to lie in front of her. Everyone is like forced to tell the truth to her. And it's an excuse for the Smallville writers to really go and delve deep into a lot of the character development and a lot of how the characters really feel about themselves and other people. And that's kind of what we got in this episode. It's an episode that's really just helping you kind of get to understand the characters more, and I think it does a good job in that aspect. When it comes to the songs, none of them were bad, but actually there is one, and I'll get to it. There is one part of this episode I'm not looking for. Okay, so anyways, most of the songs were passable. They were good. They weren't amazing. They weren't mind-blowing, but they were fine. They were totally fine. I will say that I couldn't tell if all of these actors were using their natural singing voice or if they were dubbed over by actual singers. I couldn't tell. I think everyone did a great job with singing. I think my standout would be Spock. I really, really liked his singing voice. I think Ethan Peck had a great voice, and yeah, I really liked it. I also really liked Uhura's voice as well. Cecilia Rose Gooding, I think she was really nice in the episode. Very soothing to listen to. So yeah, when it comes to that kind of aspect of it, I think it did a good job. Nothing mind-blowing. It was just a, decently fun, enjoyable episode. Probably not one that I will be going back to if I ever kind of do rewatches of the show. Whereas like the previous two episodes, I could see myself going back to over and over. This one, it's a passable episode. Again, I feel like the technobabble stuff that they went through in order to force this excuse for singing, it just didn't do it for me. It is the only thing. Now, there is one aspect of the episode I've never cringed this hard at Star Trek before. But there was a scene where we have the Klingons involved. So basically, the Klingons want to destroy this thing that's causing everyone to sing, but doing so would cause a lot of damage. And we get the Klingons being held on the ship. And this might be my fault. I was expecting metal. I was expecting Viking metal. I was expecting rock at the very least. I was expecting something epic. We had synth music, like dubstep synth, like auto-tune. I don't know what the term would be for it. It was horrible. It was the worst 30 seconds of Star Trek I think I have ever seen. Like if you thought the I'm Han Solo song in that Wii game for Star Wars was bad, this makes that, like, oh my gosh, I would rather listen to I'm Han Solo a million times over than watch that 30 seconds of this episode ever again. It was the most cringe thing I think Star Trek has ever done, ever. Like, holy shit, that was so bad. And again, it might be my fault because I'm thinking Klingons. Oh, we're gonna get something cool here, right? No. Oh my god, it was so bad. Like, wow. Someone wrote this, someone filmed it, someone edited it. Someone said yes to this. Episode was fine. That 30 seconds was the worst thing in Star Trek, I think. God, am I being harsh there? I might be a little harsh there. I don't know. It's definitely how I felt when I saw it. Maybe if I watch it again, I won't be as mad about it, but wow. It was so hard. It was so fucking painful. Like, holy shit. Wow. So overall, this episode, you know what's funny? I would give this episode a B. But because of that Klingon moment, that one moment, dropping a full grade C. This episode gets a C from me, but of course, at the end of the day, when it comes to these last 3 episodes I just reviewed, these are of course just my A+ opinion. Wow, sorry. I just, sorry. Those are just my A+ opinions. We here at A+ Opinions always want to know what you guys think, so definitely let me know your thoughts on these 3 episodes in the comments below. And let me know which one of these 3 were your favorites. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and all that wonderful stuff. Turn on that bell notification so you are aware when we drop new content. But of course, guys, above all, don't forget to keep it up A+, and I will talk to you all later. Goodbye.